because I've been thinking more and more thoroughly that the culture war is actually not a political battle at all, that the political battle is a facade for the actual battle. So,
which is?
Well, there's a group of researchers, most of them centered originally at the University of British Columbia, who started studying the subclinical manifestations of psychopathy. So there's a guy there named Robert Hare, and Robert Hare was the first psychologist who really studied psychopaths. And he developed a checklist for psychopathic behavior and the diagnostic criteria. It never became a formal diagnostic criteria, but criminologists have used it a lot. And if you're psychopathic, you're much more likely, for example, to be a repeat offender. And so he delineated the core psychopathic traits. And there's two sets of core psychopathic traits. So the first core dimension is something like predation. It's like, if I'm a psychopath, whatever's yours is rightfully mine. And if you can't defend yourself against me taking it, that's just an indication of the kind of weakness that makes you a viable moral target, right? You're too weak to resist. You're too, what would you call it? You're too contemptible to even bother with. So not only can I take your stuff, but morally I'm obligated to.
You say this very convincingly. Yeah. I know you're adopting the voice of them, but I'm just saying it.
Yeah.
You could play this part beautifully.
Yeah, well, I've watched people like that a fair bit. And the second dimension is parasitism. And so that's a more subtle form of predation. And someone with a parasitical lifestyle will adjust their attitude towards you so that so that you'll do the work and support them, and they'll do that however they can get you to do it. They'll use the sense of proclamation of victimization, for example, is one of the strategies that the parasitical psychopaths use.
Like the stripper's boyfriend who doesn't have a job.
Yeah, right. Or pimps.
We come from different schools of thought.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask a dumb layman question before we finish this.
Yeah.
I would love to know, and I'm sure I was told, the difference between sociopath and psychopath.
It's not really a relevant distinction.
Really?
Yeah. It's not really a relevant distinction.
Okay. So predation and parasite.
Right. So a psychopath is a predatory parasite, and that means they're very, very low in agreeableness, no empathy, tend to be callous. That's the personality manifestation. They're very unconscientious. They will not formulate or keep verbal contracts.
Like, who are some people who fit this description?
Ted Bundy.
Oh, I was hoping for more.
Well,
let me put it another way. Who are some people running for president now?
Well, that's an open question, right? So that brings us to the next part of this. So Robert Hare's students, a variety of them, started to study psychopathy in its more normal forms, right? Because you can imagine you're so psychopathic that you end up like fully criminal and then you're in prison. But not everybody who has psychopathic proclivities is going to be foolish enough to be criminal enough to be caught, let's say, right? So there's other things that make you get caught if you're a criminal. So they started to study subclinical psychopathy and built a personality inventory to measure subclinical psychopathic traits. And so the traits are psychopathic, so predatory parasite, Machiavellian. So like a Machiavellian individual in preparing for an interview like this would be thinking, okay, well, now I'm going to go on Bill's show. What can I get out of it? How can I elevate my status? What could I use to sell? And then every word would be crafted to extract.
With that.
Well, every word would be used to extract out something that was only self-serving. Right. You know that if your dialogue with someone goes well, what happens is you fall into an honest conversation.
No, it's just because you have I have no agenda and I have no idea where we're going to go. My agenda is to have as close to what this would be if we were not making this into a podcast, and it would be no different. I can honestly say I don't think that one thing I would have done differently, and it should feel that way, and I want it to feel that way.
Yeah, and that works. That really works well on YouTube. It's what people want because they're actually tired of overproduced instrumental conversations. Yeah. Right. Okay. So, but a Machiavellian would be manipulating the conversation constantly to get an edge, to get an angle, and so they don't use a Machiavellian doesn't use their words to represent what they believe to be true. They use their words to obtain whatever they're angling for from the person they're talking to. And so that happens on the sexual front, for example, very often. So people who are hyper committed to short-term mating strategies tend to use instrumental language, right? They're manipulative. So psychopathic, Machiavellian, narcissistic. So someone who's narcissistic wants unearned social status, right? And the last one, they had to add this. This triad was first called the dark triad, and then they had to add sadism. Because it turns out if you're all three of those things, you also take positive delight in the suffering of other people. And there's a very high correlation between the dark tetrad personality traits and left-wing authoritarianism. So that's why I think it's not fundamentally political, is that what's happening is that there's a small minority of people who are very manipulative, who use compassion as a camouflage. And then people who are generally and genuinely compassionate, they can be manipulated easily. And that's why you're seeing, that's part of the reason you're seeing this deviation from more classical liberalism. There's no better camouflage for someone who's truly dark than compassion.
Right.
Wow,
that is some interesting shit.
Yeah, it's brutal, and the data is accumulated. Well, it's worse than that too. It really quite frightens me, because 3% of the population has these traits, basically, and that's stable cross-culturally. And what seems to happen is if it falls to 1%, everybody forgets that people like that exist. And so then when they pop up, they can be successful. But if it gets up to about 5%, then everybody thinks, oh, the psychopaths are here, and they start beating them back. And so they stabilize around 3%, right? Any more than that presents a positive danger to the integrity of the state itself. Now, I think we enable the psychopaths online, because I think that online communication circumvents all our defenses. Yeah, well, there's accruing literature on that front too, because the online troll types who do nothing but cause trouble online and have these personality traits. And
what's going to happen if it tips past the 3% to 5% or 10%?
Well, that's what happened in the Russian Revolution. Like, what happens if those people get the upper hand? They like to dance in the ruins, man.
Right.
You bet. And they're out for mayhem.
Right. And they're drunk on the elixir of revolution.
Well, they're not going to be successful pursuing their manipulations in a society that's actually predicated on work. So they want to flip things upside down because they can rape the runes. That's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah. It's very bad. And I really am concerned that, see, because we virtualize communication, right? And that means that there's certain defenses that we have against being exploited that are no longer making themselves manifest. So you can say anything you want online, and nothing, especially if you're anonymous, and nothing will happen to you. And you can bring any kind of accusation against anyone at zero cost to yourself.
Right.
And that's not good. Like it might be like fatally not good, because something is driving polarization. Right. You know, 80% Americans agree on most political issues with about an 80% overlap, right? But we're getting polarized. It's like, well, what the hell changed? Well, how about how about all of our modes of communication, right? They've radically changed, and they certainly enable reputation savaging, gossip mongering, cancellation, all of that. It's way easier online.
Not just a difference in degree, a difference in kind.
Absolutely.
I've had this argument with people on my show say, oh, you know, that's what they said when radio came in and TV. It's like, and computers. No, it's different. It really is different, because there isn't this addictive quality to it. It's a difference in kind. It's the cell phone is more like a pacemaker than a television set. I was able to turn off the television set, even though I liked I Dream of Jeannie and Bonanza and whatever. I could have watched it, but I wasn't addicted to it. And they're addicted to it. And you're right, it has changed the wiring. As someone said about another thing, we're building the plane as we're flying it, especially with kids.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and we're doing very strange things on the sexual front too.
Oh, very.
So I think 35% of internet. Yeah, well, exactly, and in Hollywood in general, 35% of internet traffic is pornographic, and you know that's a lot.
It's about 42 in my house, but I take your point. Well, of course, what you would